tackle a concept of parenthood, but a spiritual level of parenthood that relates to our own self-image and self-worth, as well as how we see potential in ourselves and other people. And let's go back to some very basic Bible study, very basic Torah study that we know and that we're familiar with. And that's the story of Yitzchak, the story of Isaac and his two sons, Yaakov and Esau, known as Jacob and Esau, but we're going to use Yaakov and Esau throughout the class. And as the Torah tells us, Yaakov was a man of the tent. He would sit and study. Quote unquote, he was the good son, and Esau was a hunter, but he was also eventually became a murderer, and he was the evil son. And when it came time to give the blessings, Yitzchak wanted to give the blessings to his older son, even though older by a few minutes, even though they were twins. But he wanted to give the blessings to Esau, and Rivka wanted the blessings to go to Yaakov. And as we know from the beginning of the portion, Esau sold his birthright of being the firstborn to Yaakov after he murdered Nimrod. Let's focus on a very simple question, which is, what did Yitzchak see in his son Esau that he wanted to give the blessings? I want to just simplify the concept. Esau was a murderer. He was not a good person. In practicality, he would not have passed the test of being a good person in any generation. I know that very often when we look at history, very often we say, hey, this person was a product of their time. You can't judge them, and that's sometimes true. In the case of Esau, he was a bad person in any generation. Based on what the Torah tells us about him, based on the text that we have, he was not a good person. Yitzchak was he was the heir of Abraham, and he had the blessings that God gave Abraham, that your children, your descendants will be like the stars in the sand, and they will be the ones that have to basically be a light unto the nations, and they are the ones that have to carry Abraham's torch. So he had this immense responsibility. He has to pass on. This is not something, it's not a matter of who do I like better. This is not an emotional game of who's my favorite child. This is a responsibility that God had passed on to Abraham that now is in Isaac's hand, Yitzchak's hands, that he has to pass on to one of his children to fulfill God's ambassadorship to the world for society. He has a massive responsibility. So what was he thinking by even potentially giving Esau the blessings that was given to him by Abraham? That's what we're going to focus on in this class. And the answer is a Kabbalistic answer. It's a Kabbalistic idea that is revolutionary in how we see the potential of another human being. And it's a very revolutionary concept because what it does is it refocuses and reframes the potential of somebody and our own potential, and not letting ourselves get demoralized by our lack of ability or lack of results in some cases, and feeling that we just, we're handed a bad deck of cards. So here's what the Torah tells us in the pure text, that they grew up. Esau was a man who hunted. He was a man of the field. Doesn't say he was bad. He was not a bad person from this text. And Yaakov was a wholesome man living in tents. It's the commentaries, it's the Midrash that later tells us that the idea of living in tents means that you're studying. And eventually Esau, from being a man of the world and a man of hunting, led him to become an assassin. He actually became an assassin for hire. So then the Torah tells us something even more interesting. Yitzchak loved Esau, and Rivka loved Yaakov. Now, what's even more interesting is the reasoning the Torah. The Torah doesn't say anything for no reason. What is the reasoning the Torah gives? Kitzayid befiv. In the Hebrew, it says that Yitzchak loved Esau. Why? Kitzayid, whatever he would capture was in his mouth. In other words, in literal sense, that means that whatever he trapped, assuming animals, is what he ate. He ate from what he trapped. And Rivka loved Yaakov, and it doesn't give a reason. This is a very confusing verse. Because what is Yitzchak? So he hunts, okay? There are a lot of people who hunt, and it's a very good survival skill. But what does it have to do with why Yitzchak loves one of his children over the other? Which is a weird thing for the Torah to tell us anyways. The Torah is here to teach us life, and the idea that you have one child you love over the other is already questionable behavior. And then also, if you're going to give a reason for one, why not give a reason for the other? So there's a lot of questions on this verse. So we're going to go through some interesting ideas, some interesting concepts. We're not going to answer every question because we're going to stick with one thread. There's a lot of discussion on this whole concept and this whole story, but we're going to try to stick within a thread because we want to focus on a specific life lesson that we want to learn from this. So it says that Esav, and Rashi quotes this in the commentary, that Esav was very good at deceiving his father, in convincing his father that he was a good person. That the idea of tzayid befiv, that his trappings, that whatever that his hunting was in his mouth, means that he would say things to his father that convinced his father that he was a good person. And what does that mean? So the Medrash gives an example, and the Rashi quotes this Medrash, is that he asked his father how to tithe from the straw and the salt. Okay? And from this, his father thought that he's very careful with tithing, which was already the idea of fulfilling the Torah and mitzvahs before Mount Sinai was already considered to be above and beyond because they weren't required to do so. So the fact that he was careful with it was already a demonstration of his meticulousness in fulfilling the commandments of God, that it impressed Yitzchak, and that's one of the things that he was able to convince him through the slyness of his mouth. Now, there's a lot of questions about that, but let's first explain what this example of straw and salt is. Once the Torah was given and the laws of tithing were explained, straw and salt do not need to be tithed from, for one very simple reason, is that they don't have an existence of their own. Salt is not something you eat on its own. Salt is meant to complement another item, another food. And the same is with straw. Straw, whether it's being used as, animal food or animal, whatever it's being used for, it's not meant to be on its own. It's meant to be part of something else. It's a support item. They're both support items. And therefore, halachically, according to Jewish law, they do not need to be tithed from. So by Esav asking his father how much to tithe from salt and straw, he's actually showing his ignorance in the laws of tithing. So why would this be considered the slyness of his ability to fool his father if he's really showing his ignorance in tithing? So there's actually a difference, because before the Torah was given, the idea of tithing was more of a metaphor. It was more that because they knew it was something that was going to happen in the future, they kind of just partook in it, but not the details didn't matter as much. So they did tithe from straw and salt, even though it wasn't required, because at the time it was more of a symbolic thing, and therefore it was something that was done. So therefore, the slyness of Esav was more relevant at the time, or at least could be considered authentic, and therefore Yitzchak bought it and thought his son is actually careful with the commandments. Now, there's a big problem with that whole concept and the whole idea in the first place, because what happens in the story, as we have on the screen right now, what happens in the story? So Yitzchak, and I'm just going to paraphrase the story, Yitzchak feels he goes blind, and he feels that his time is coming, and he tells his elder son Esav to go prepare him a meal. And in order, as a way to draw down the blessings, because by doing a mitzvah, by doing a good deed for his father, by preparing a meal, then his father could bless him. So he says, go prepare a meal, and then I will be able to bless you before I die. What happens, as we see it later in the text, Rivka overhears this, and she tells Yaakov to dress up as Esav. Rivka prepares the meal and gives it to Yaakov, and Yaakov goes in Esav's coat, in his hunting coat, and he goes and he pretends to be Esav, and he goes and he steals the blessings from Esav. Now, in that experience, the Torah, this is straight in the text of the Torah, in that whole experience, Yitzchak asked Yaakov, who, thinking he was Esav, asked him, how did you get her so fast? How did you prepare the meal for me so fast? And Yaakov said, it was with God's help. I was able to, prepare it very quickly with God's help. And as soon as he said that, Yitzchak said, come, let me feel you, because he didn't believe that Esav would use such words. He was blind. So he had to feel him to feel his ear, to feel that it's actually Esav. So he knew that Esav doesn't use words like with God's help. He knew exactly who Esav was. Just from that story alone, which is clear in the Torah, written in the Torah, we know that Yitzchak pretty much knew exactly who his son Esav was. So why was he so insistent on giving the blessings to Esav? Let's read the text quickly, and then we're going to go to the next part of this question so we could try to analyze it and understand it better. So, and when Yitzchak grew old, his eyes faded, he could not see. He called Esav his elder son and said to him, my son Esav, said to him, here I am. Yitzchak said, behold, if you please, I am old, I do not know the day of my death. Now, therefore, please take your equipment, your sword, and your bow, and go out to the field and trap a deer for me. The deer is implied. It doesn't say that in the Torah. Make it into a tasty dish, the way I like it, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul will bless you before I die. Now, the rest of the story, we don't actually have the text here, but the rest of the story is that Rivka gets Yaakov to go in and basically pretend to be Esav, and Yitzchak goes ahead and gives Yaakov the blessings, thinking it's Esav, and Yaakov gets the blessings, and that's how the story continues. Now, let's focus specifically on the relationship. We're not going to focus on the story of Yaakov stealing the blessings. That's a whole interesting story of its own, but that's not what we're going to talk about tonight as much. Tonight we're going to talk about the relationship between father and son, between Yitzchak, between Isaac, between Yitzchak and his son Esau. Did he really fool him, and why does the Torah make it sound like he did? And what really was going on between the two of these people? And why was Yitzchak so intent on giving him the blessings, this responsibility that was given to Abraham, which was he was basically passing it down to a murderer? Think of a successful business. Okay, if you found a very successful business, you start a successful business, and you want to pass it on to your child, which is what many people like to do. You start a family business, and you want your children to keep it up. You still have a responsibility to make sure that the children you give it over to are going to run it responsibly. It's something that it's kind of goes without saying that you have to make that decision, not just say, as long as they're my child, it's okay. You have to understand the skills and the abilities of your children in order to make sure that you're making a responsible decision for the business, especially if there are others involved. How much more so if we're talking about the blessings from God that were given to Abraham, that talks about the future of monotheism, the future of humanity and society, and the evolution of the world becoming a better place, which is so important. He's about to entrust it into the hands of a murderer. So let's go into that relationship. So this is the Yismach Moshe, and he gives us a little bit of commentary here. There was much to examine in these verses. How was Esau so convincingly wise as to deceive his saintly father? If he was someone who openly sat in tents and engaged in hunting secretly, there would have been room for error. In other words, if he was not a hunter, if he was not a murderer, if he was like, a secret assassin, he was a good person, he was a good person by day, but only at night is when he would go do his evil stuff, then maybe fine. But considering that he was a man of the field, exposed to all, everyone knew exactly who he was. And he didn't just kill random people, he killed Nimrod, he killed kings. Then with what schemes and cunning did he really deceive his father? Like really, how could he keep that information from his father? Also, the Midrash, which says that he would trap and deceive him with his words, is likewise puzzling. How exactly did he mislead him? What information was he really keeping from his father to really convince him that he's a good person? So going on, there's another commentary. We must understand from the story, it seems that Yitzchak didn't want to bless Yaakov at all. The fact that he wanted to just bless Esav, why? Was he unaware that Yaakov was a wholesome man living in tents? Living in tents, as the commentaries explain, means that he was studying, that he was engaged in the spirituality of the connecting with God. Even if you thought Esau was righteous because he deceived his father with his mouth about the tithing, we still don't find that he thought the opposite of Yaakov. So why didn't he also want to bless his son Yaakov? He should have called both of them and blessed them both. At least, you have a 50-50 chance that one of them will take the blessings in the right direction. So why was he basically betting all his eggs in one basket of Esav, who it's pretty obvious who Esav was, and that Yitzchak, who was also a smart man, I mean, one of the patriarchs, who, according to Kabbalah, represented the attribute of gevura, of strength and discipline. It's hard to imagine that he would be so easily fooled by his son. Avram, on the other hand, who represented the idea of kindness and giving, maybe you could say that he refused to see the negativity. But Yitzchak wasn't made of that. He was made of the strength of discipline. He was made of strength. He was made of the ability to see the truth. So how could Esav be so have that ability to have this hold on him to want to only give him the blessings? Okay. I'm not going to focus on the third question as much because it's not really as relevant right now. So the answer is not as much to do with the individual as it is to do with the potential. And this is where the straw and the salt come in a little bit, and it's going to help lead us to where we want to go. So let's understand why Esav chose the question of what is the tithing amount for straw and salt and not just regular wheat. Why didn't he ask him, what should be the amount for wheat or barley or any other type of agriculture? Why did he choose straw and salt? The Torah tells us that. Like, what is so unique about that? So here's one of the commentaries. He chose straw and salt over all other items because they are exempt from Meiser, both biblically and rabbinically. And this stands in contrast to other items like vegetables, which though exempt biblically from Meiser, are nevertheless obligated rabbinically. The biblical exemption is derived from the verse, a tenth of your grain, excluding vegetables that aren't grain. So 1 second. However, what kind of question is this to ask? How does one tithe, whatever the item is, as it is different from how one tithes anything else? Moreover, with this question, he was showing himself to be an ignoramus who doesn't know the law, that straw is exempt from tithing. This isn't cunning at all. On the contrary, his father would say he doesn't pay attention to his studies, for if he did, he would know what's obligated and what's exempt. So the answer, as we mentioned earlier, is that before Mount Sinai, everything was more symbolic. And therefore, when it came time to tithe, Abraham gave everything. So when it came time to tithe, so Malki Tzedek was considered to be the Kohen at the time. He was the son of Shem. So it says that Abraham gave him a tenth of everything, which means that even straw and salt. So in other words, before the giving of the Torah, because it was symbolic, they tithed of everything. So why did Esav specifically choose these two items to ask his father about? Because if he asks about wheat or even vegetables that is only rabbinically mandated, not biblically mandated, or anything else, it's still an item of its own. It still has its own identity. It's still a vegetable you could still eat, even though wheat is a staple. But vegetable could still be an independent dish. Salt and straw is not independent. It doesn't amount to anything independently. And what Esav was trying to show his father, that he pays attention, or he has the ability to pay attention to the things that are seemingly insignificant, to the items of the world, to the creations of the world that are usually just additives. What does that mean, additive? When something is an additive, it's not as understood, or as when you look at a full picture. So let's say you have a vehicle, a car, right? So you understand that the engine is what makes the car move, or gives the car energy, and it gives the car whatever. You have an alternator. You have you understand there are some very important pieces, but then there's some additives to the car that are important, but they're not essentials to the vehicle. Or they're essentials, but they're not necessarily understood essentials. And you don't really know what they are. So when you go to the mechanic and the mechanic tells you need to replace this and this, you don't even know what it is because it's not, or you don't know what it does or why you need it. And you need the mechanic to explain you or whatever. You have to Google it because unless you're a car expert. But the point is that there are certain basics that the car, how the car works and the mechanics of the car, because you understand the car needs to function. But then there's additives that is either a nicety or it's a luxury or it's important, but the car could still survive without it, or it is a necessity, but it's not enough of a necessity for you to understand the role that it plays. And that's what salt and straw is. Why did Esau choose these to ask his father, and why was his father so impressed? So let's go on to this is the key here. And this is the key to the concept. I want to say it verbally first, and then I'm going to go to the text inside. When God creates the world, the Kabbalah teaches us that there's a very limited amount of energy that God allows to be exposed in the creation. Why? Because God conceals his energy in order for us to have free choice. Because if God allows his energy to be revealed, then we see godliness in everything, and then we basically are committed to God, and we will never do anything wrong because God's right in front of us in everything, and there's no free choice. So it's like if you're living in front of a king the entire time, you're going to live your life perfectly, but are you a good person? You don't know, because you never had a chance really to have to to really choose, because you never really had that freedom to make a choice without anybody important looking. So God conceals his energy, conceals his revelation, doesn't remove it, but conceal it from our vision, or our visual, which means that God's still here everywhere, but we don't see it. So nature, the word nature, which is in Hebrew hateva, is the same numerical value as Elohim, which is the name of God that is used that God uses in the Torah to create the world, which means that God uses nature to conceal his existence. What is nature? It's a characteristic of the way the world works that makes us feel as this is just the nature of the world happening, but that's how God conceals himself in the world, so we're able to have free choice and feel like we can do whatever we want, and then when we do something good, it's our own effort because we are choosing to do something good. That's the natural order of the way the world works. However, there is a layer of godliness, of spark of godliness within every single person and within every single thing, that is a deeper layer of revelation of godliness that we have the ability to reveal. And when you do something, you do a commandment, you do an act of kindness, or you go above and beyond, you stretch yourself to the point that above your human nature, that's how you reveal the godliness within that. When you follow a commandment from God, you reveal, using materialism, you elevate that materialism and you reveal the godliness within that. That's the Kabbalistic side of this. God gifted Esav with a soul that had the ability, bear with me here, that had the ability to reveal the sparks, the deeper sparks of God, the infinite sparks of God that are in the world, in the physical world, that are concealed. And where do you find those sparks the most? In the additives, in the salt, in the straw, in the things that you seemingly don't necessarily need. They're not the essentials of life. Because the essentials of life, we feel connected to, we feel a necessity. Water, like you can't live without water. If you go to most cities, you see they're built on rivers because you need the water. Bread, all the other basic necessities of life, we know that God is within them because we need them to live. So it's not as hard to understand that God sustains us through these natural items, because that's what keeps us alive. But the additives, the extras, the things that makes us wonder, why does the world even need this? That's where the hidden sparks of God reside, because that's where we're actually able to make the difference and be able to recognize that everything in the world, not just the necessities, but everything in the world is God. What Esau was telling his father by asking him, how do I tithe from straw and salt? He was telling his father, I have a soul in God that could see the sparks in salt and straw, that I have the ability to elevate everything. I have the ability to actually reveal the godly sparks in everything and be able to draw down the infinite light of God in everything, which made Yitzchak so excited with Esav's potential. Now, here's the problem. Every person still has free choice, okay? Nobody is designated to be a righteous or wicked person. God doesn't decide that. We decide that once we're born. God gives us potential, but we still have to decide that. So while Esav had this tremendous potential, he still had to make the choice to be what he would be. So God gave him this tremendous potential to be a righteous person and to be able to reveal all the sparks of God. And Yitzchak saw that, but Esav chose to use his energy, his God-given energy, for such negativity, which is what made him such an evil person, because he was taking all that God gift, and he was dragging it down into evil actions. What Yitzchak was hoping to accomplish by giving Esav the blessings was to turn the tide, turn it around. I have such powerful blessings from God to Abraham. If I could give these blessings to Esav, maybe I could use these blessings to turn Esav around, to reveal that potential, to help him harness this gift that he has from God, to finally bring about that kind of revelation of godliness, to bring about this perfection in the world and avoid all the suffering that is to follow, that comes from the hidden godliness that is not revealed. Let me explain that for a second. I'm sorry if I'm confusing, but all the bad things that happen in the world are because godliness is hidden. In other words, the only reason why bad things happen, war and evil and sickness and all these other things, is because godliness is not revealed. The source of everything is not being revealed. So if Esav would reveal it all through that potential, he would avoid all the catastrophe that would follow, that followed in society. And Yitzchak saw that opportunity and he wanted to materialize it. And he realized, if I could just change it, if I could turn him around, I can perfect the world. I could save the world. And that's why he was going all in. He wasn't going to give up such a tremendous opportunity. Now let's see it in some of the texts, and let's break it down into our practicalities. This is from the Rebbe. The common denominator between salt and straw, despite their difference, is that on their own they have no significant value. But when mixed with other things, they bring a benefit far beyond what they offer individually. This can be plainly observed. A small amount of salt, which on its own has minimal monetary value or importance, adds flavor to a dish of food in a way that greatly enhances it far beyond the actual quantity of salt itself. Not only does it add taste, but without it, the food may be lacking altogether. The same applies to straw. In and of itself, whether as an animal fodder or as fuel for an oven, etc., it has very little monetary value or significance. But when it's used to make bricks for construction, its value is greatly increased. So, this was Esav's question in the unique case. There is room to say that salt and straw's tithes should not be measured by standard unit weight or count, like tithing animals, but rather by value of those items we'll have when actually used. If that's so, then the question regarding salt and straw becomes, how does one calculate their worth? Because it's going to impact so much more. According to this current standard of standalone value, in other words, the way it is alone, which is not much, or based on the impact it's going to have, or according to the benefit they'll produce when used in combination as a flavoring or as a mixture. All right, so how does that play into our conversation? Let's take a look. So here's what we're going to see about the source of Yaakov and Esav in their soul. According to Kabbalah, Yaakov is rooted in the spiritual world of tikkun. So when God created the world, it says that God first created the world of Tohu, which is the world of chaos, spiritual chaos. And then, the spiritual chaos couldn't hold on purpose. It's not like God made a mistake, but the spiritual chaos is the sparks that fell into the materialism of the world. And then God created the world that we live in, which is tikkun, which is the world of discipline. So Yaakov's soul is rooted in the world of tikkun, where Esav is rooted in the spiritual world of Tohu, which is the world of chaos. The lights of Tohu are very powerful, but they cannot be contained. As a result, the lights withdrew, leaving the containers to shatter and fall below. This is why Esav, as he manifested in this world, became a wicked person. However, when considering the ultimate root of Esav and the bright lights of Tohu, these lights are actually loftier than the lights of Tikkun. In other words, the potential of what Esav could accomplish, the potential of his revelation, the potential of his ability to change the world is even greater than Yaakov. Okay. So now that we know this, that Esav's soul is rooted in a higher source and higher potential than Yaakov's soul, how does that play out in our in our conversation? So let's translate this to the question that he had to his father about the straw and the salt. So he's asking his father, do you look at the straw and the salt the way it is right now? Do you look at me, Esav, the way I am right now? In other words, as an evil person? Or do you look at me the way I could become once it's materialized into whatever the potential could become? Just like salt, do you look at salt the way it is in its container, or do you look at salt once it's added to a dish and it turns that dish into a tasty dish? And the same goes with straw. Do you look at it once it's turned into bricks or into whatever else it could become? Do you see an item for what it is or what it could become? And what he was telling his father is that not only does he have the ability to elevate the sparks in the straw and the straw and the salt, but do you look at me? Are you just going to look at me the way I am now, or are you going to see the potential of what I could become? So now, this is the deeper meaning of the verse that Yitzchak loved Esav. Because what he loved is the potential. And what did he love? What is the idea of the trapped, of the fact that Said Befiv, that the trapped, he would eat from the trapped, the food that he would trap, is the trapped sparks that he had access to. The trapped sparks that he was able to that he contained, the ability to elevate the sparks. And by the way, Kabbalah teaches us that Esav is the patriot. Sorry, that the great Shmaya and Naftalion, who are the teachers of Hillel. They were the ones who taught Hillel. Met the whole story of Hillel when he climbed to the roof and because he couldn't afford the entry fee, and he listened into his teachers, Shmaya and Naftalion. So Shmai and Naftalion were descendants from Sancheriv. They were converts to Judaism. And they were descendants from Sancheriv, who was from Amalek, who was from Esav. So they were descendants of Esav. And Yitzchak saw the potential of Esav, namely the descent, in other words, such holy sparks that Esav possessed that he could have revealed then too. But he saw the potential of Shmai and Naftalion, including Rabbi Meir as well, who was also a convert from the Romans, who are descendants of Esav. And he saw that all of this is meant to be revealed with the coming of Mashiach. And what Yitzchak wanted to accomplish is to speed the process up and not wait and not just let it all play out, but actually bring about the coming of Mashiach, sooner versus wait out all the suffering and all the challenges. So Yitzchak saw Esav as someone with untapped explosive potential who needed encouragement to realize it. And the blessing was meant to awaken that greatness. And Yaakov, who was already a strong spiritual path, didn't need any extra. He was already doing everything right. So I don't need to give you a blessing. You're already fine. You're doing good. But Esav needed it. So this is why Yitzchak wanted to give Esav the blessings, and why he was so intent on and throwing all his eggs in that basket to transform and to make Esav into who he believed Esav could become, and to transform the world. Now, if that's the case, why does it say that Rivka loved Yaakov? Why can't he get Rivka in on this plan? Why can't Rivka be a part of this great ability? All he has to do is tell Rivka, if we could transform Esav into the holy person that he could become, then Mashiach will come right now. The Messiah will come right now, and we'll be good to go. The world all our descendants will avoid all the suffering for our descendants, and there'll be no pain and suffering. Why couldn't he convince Rivka to do that? So let's explain that in a second. So let's understand first the characteristics of Avram and Yitzchak. Avram represented innovation, the idea of revolution, changing. In other words, changing the world, waking up early in the morning, breaking the status quo, The idea of kindness, but the idea of flow, the idea of giving, it's a very strong characteristic. Yitzchak represented strength, discipline, and stability, which is structure and continuity. I'm not going to mention the risk part because that's not what I want to talk about. But what does it have to do? Is because what Yitzchak saw in Esav is in his name. What does Esav mean? Esav means is that he was complete asu. The word Esav in Hebrew means asa, that he was complete, and that's why he was born full of hair, meaning that he was already complete. That when he was born, he already had such high potential and such high ability to accomplish so much that what Yitzchak thought is that perfect. This is the way to sustain everything Avraham founded. This is the perfect way, not just to bring Mashiach, but this is the way to ensure that Avram's legacy is going to be complete. So Yitzchak represented this discipline, this continuity, this structure, this strength that he was hoping that he could transform Esav into that same level of completeness to be able to ensure that Avraham's revolution will be sustaining. So why couldn't Rivka join in? Problem is that with all of Yitzchak's grand plans, there's one ingredient that's missing. And that ingredient, I'll share a story to elaborate on that ingredient. So the story from taught by Mendel Futterfass, and he tells a story about a bird. And the bird prayed to God. The bird was in a tree and it was very thirsty. And it prayed to God to bring it drinks, bring me water, help me with my thirst. And God answered the bird's prayers, and a wind came and it blew the bird straight to another tree that was right over a delicious looking pond. And the bird prayed to God again and said, "That's so nice of you, God. Thank you so much for sending the wind. And now I'm over this pond, but the pond is still all the way down there and I'm in the tree." So the wind came back and it blew the bird straight up and landed the bird straight on the pond. Now the bird is floating on the pond. And the bird prayed to God again. "That's so sweet of you. Thank you, God. But the water is still below me. And my mouth is over here and the water is over here." And this time, this is obviously a metaphor, God says you have to actually bend down and drink. The flaw in Yitzchak's plan is that Esav has to actually do the work. Esav has the potential, but it cannot come just from Yitzchak. The blessings cannot just come from above. Yitzchak has to step up. Esav has to step up himself. And Rivka realized and understood that Esav is not willing to do that. That with his free choice, he's choosing the path and choosing the actions that are preventing him from receiving the blessings and utilizing that. No matter how many blessings you throw at him, he is not actually absorbing them or internalizing them and making the choices necessary to actually transform himself to become better. The whole purpose of creation and the whole purpose of toil of the human being in order to transform the world and elevate the world is about the human being being a partner with God, which means God gives us blessings, but we have to plow the fields and we have to plant the seeds. We have to do the work. God gives us blessings, but we have to do the work. And what Rivka realized is that there has to be, or what Rivka understood is that the human being has to actually put in the work. And because Esav wasn't willing to put in the work, she understood the reality of the situation, that we need a partner, someone who's actually willing to do the work. What did Yaakov actually do? In addition to taking the blessings, he went and worked for 22 years. He worked really, really hard. Ultimately, the way Hashem wants us to receive these blessings, the way Hashem wants us to perfect the world, is not through some magical, supernatural revelation, but through, yes, we want God's blessings, but God wants us to be partners in that blessings through being able to put in our own effort and make those good choices to be able to, as we say over here, to integrate and to bring all the characteristics together and actually put in the effort to make the changes that are necessary and make the choices that are necessary to be the best person that we could be. So you could have all the potential in the world, and you could have other people that believe in that potential, but you also have to take the steps that are necessary to put that potential into purpose and put that potential into reality, which is so important, which is the final step, which is most important step. Potential alone isn't enough, and external external effort isn't enough. It has to be internal as well. You can have all the best mentors in the world, you could have the best coaches in the world, you could have the best supporters in the world, but if you're not willing to put in the effort yourself, then it's not going to it's not going to help you or impact you, because or it's not going to make that impact, that change that you so badly want, or that help that you so badly want. You're going to have to put in that effort, and that's what Esau was not willing to do, and Yaakov was, and that's why Yaakov merited the blessings, because he was able to harness all these different energies, all these different character traits, and be able to bring about the 12 tribes through his own effort. So now, okay, so let's recap this. This is very important. So while Esau had tremendous potential, and that's why Yitzchak wanted to give him the blessings, Yitzchak wanted to be able to help his descendants, help all of society, all of the future, the entire world, by transforming Esau into a good person. And Esau possessed that holy soul. Esau still had to make the free choice. And while we are given blessings, and we have Avram, and we have Yitzchak, and we have Yaakov, and we have the matriarchs, we have everyone, all the blessings, we still have to take that energy and find our own unique individuality to be able to utilize that energy for the right reasons and put in our own effort. And through doing that, we're able to accomplish and make our unique mark and fulfill the unique mission that Hashem has set out for us. And when we all do that, we're able to bring about the perfection of the world that Yitzchak originally intended to achieve, and finally fulfill that through the coming of Mashiach. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and we really appreciate you being a part of this.